please, David, I kindly ask you on stage. Please give him a hand. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Very impressed that you've managed to get up after your long and, I hope, incredibly pleasant evening. I couldn't join you, sadly, because my voice is beginning to give up. So if I'd spent 2 hours, 3 hours last night with you guys shouting in the bar, you wouldn't have had me here this morning, and not for the obvious reasons. Everyone brings prejudices to every presentation. And my prejudices are that I started my career doing a PhD in philosophy and theology. I spent 3 years in the library reading, and I spent 1 year in a room writing. And I would defend to the death the right of anyone to do that kind of PhD. I certainly never used it once in my career, never used it once in business, but it formed the way I thought about the world. So that's my set of prejudices. But I decided not to become an academic, and instead I went into media. And like a good media person, if you overrun in a television program, the presentation people pull you off air. So I promise you I'll be no more than 25 minutes. I've been asked to speak about this new National Centre for Universities and Business. We launched it about 6 weeks ago. It's based around an organisation that had been around for 25 years called the Council for Industry and Higher Education, which was funded by about 35 corporate companies, really at the top end of our business sector, and the members were their chairs and chief executives, and it was also about 20 universities, Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, but also groups of new universities. However, it was capped in terms of the number of members. Unusually for a membership organization, you couldn't actually recruit anyone else. So it was limited by that membership, although it did lots of good work, which I'll talk about in a second. About 18 months ago, one of our senior vice-chancellors, Sir Tim Wilson, was asked by the government to look again at business-university collaboration and how to get the best out of it. Now, this would be the third time this had been looked at in the UK, going back 12 years to Sir Richard Lambert, who had been the editor of the Financial Times and was then the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry. So we've constantly, as we say in the UK, dug up the drains on this business-university partnership to try and make more and more sense of it. And one of the things that Tim said in his recommendations was that the slides should move. Well, that's good. There we are. That my organization, the CIHE, should set up a subscription-based, there we are. So, yep. Should set up a subscription-based business to do what he called a comprehensive repository of good practice. Now, we know that's important. We know that sharing case studies with each other is incredibly important. Success is something that we can copy. But I think we all collectively felt that when Tim asked us to do it, there was something bigger lurking in it, something more interesting for us all to do. And by the time it came back out of our Department of Business, it became the second quote that we should set up a national centre for universities and business, focused on the strategic partnership between business and universities. And I stress strategic because, of course, strategy is about long-term thinking. It's not about short-term tech transfer, it's not about short-term anything, it's about long-term thinking. And we're really focused on working with universities and business as equal partners in long-term thinking. Now, just to double back on the CIHE, this is an example of the kind of work that we did. So we set up, over the past 4 years, we set up task forces, bringing together senior business leaders and senior academics to look at a big problem. And this one, we looked at how do we get the most impact out of the 26 billion that's spent a year in R&D in the UK and the 8 billion that's spent in the public sector. Now, it's an example of the kind of people that we managed to attract into these task forces. It was chaired by the Global Head of Research and Development at BP and by one of our senior vice chancellors, but it also had on it one of our ex-science ministers, the Global Head of R&D at Rolls-Royce, the Global Head of R&D at BAE Systems, the chief executive of Cisco Systems in the UK and Ireland. So it's that kind of people brought it together, which is why I think the government asked us to take on this challenge of setting up the National Centre, because it's unusual, as you know, to get that level of corporate engagement with these kinds of issues. But the other thing we made sure we did is everything we did, we turned into action at the other end. So the project you see on the left-hand side, called the Brighton Fuse, and the one in the middle called London Creative and Digital Fusion, came out of a task force that we did on the creative and digital industries. And that was chaired by the chief executive of the Financial Times Group, and again by one of our senior vice chancellors. And at the end of it, we said, right, what are we going to do about that? Normally, of course, in these kinds of reports, you just basically hand it over to government and say, it's your problem. And I kind of felt that that wasn't the right answer, that the report actually for me was the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. So what we've raised about £6 million, not entirely sure what that is in euros at the moment, to implement the findings. In Brighton, which is a seaside city not far from London, we're working with 2,500 creative and digital companies and the 2 universities there to understand why 2,500 creative and digital companies exist in that city. As we know, cluster theory is all well and good, but trying to find good empirical examples of how you can replicate it is quite tough. So that's the project we're doing in Brighton. In London, we're working with about 1,000 to 2,000 companies on a big knowledge exchange project with most of the universities there. So, and that's a 2-year project. So over 3 years, we've done the task force, and then we tried to implement the findings. So what we're trying to do in the National Centre, again, in the new National Centre, is to do this kind of work, which is take the analysis and implement it in a long-term basis. We thought long and hard about the mission and the values of the organization. And in particular, we thought long and hard about that word prosperity. Initially, it was growth. Initially, the vision was to increase the growth in the UK. And something nagged me about that. And I kept going back and back to the team about it and back to my trustees and said, there's something not quite right about that, because there's something broader in what we're trying to do here. And prosperity seemed to us to sum up the idea that growth for its own sake is not what we're about. Certainly not in universities. Universities are driven by values. And good businesses are driven by values. You can't just say you're going to grow at the expense of the planet or the expense of your population. So prosperity is that sense of a rounded society, trying to be at ease with itself as it prospers. We're also focused on this concept of well-being. If education it's about many things, but one of it should be about the well-being of the individual, the roundedness of the individual, and the society in which the education takes place. And the means by doing this is world-leading business-university collaboration. And it's a partnership, again. It's this idea of partnership. And it's not about one side telling the other side what to do. And it's about shared language and shared experience and so on. We are pretty good at this in the UK, actually. I mean, recent surveys suggest that we're number 2 in the world at business-university collaboration. But as was said yesterday, just because you're quite good at something doesn't mean you can't be very good at it. And we're, again, trying to make sure that we are one of the best in the world at doing this. And frankly, being here, it's great, because I can hear all sorts of different experiences that I can take back to the UK and say, why don't we try that? It's a genuine UK-wide organisation funded by the funding councils of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England, but also funded by other players in the innovation chain, like the Technology Strategy Board, which is kind of like our DARPA in the UK. So it's invested in by everyone who's in the innovation chain and in the higher education chain, because I think we all genuinely care about this. But it's still got funding in there from about 35 to 40 big corporates, and the plan is to increase the membership to represent small companies and most universities. The 3 areas of focus: brokering world-class collaboration as well as facilitating it. I want to come back to that in a second, because actually I don't think that we're good enough, and I think it's true everywhere, about using Internet and Web 2.0 technologies to deliver that brokering service. The second thing is working together to build the talent base. And that's another word that we're starting to explore, is the concept of talent rather than skills. Skills, it seems to us, is a very instrumentalist view of what you're trying to do in education and what businesses require. If you go into a big company now, certainly in the UK and in the US, they don't have human resource departments, they have talent departments. Everyone's focused on this idea that you're trying to grow the talent for the future. You're trying to grow your next generation of leaders. You're trying to grow your next generation of team players. And you don't get that just by focusing on what they do. You focus on who they are. So we're focused on that idea. And then finally, we're trying to develop this idea of how do you translate the natural inventiveness of universities, and I do think universities are full of naturally inventive people, into innovation in companies. Now, it's not unilinear, and we know it's not unilinear, but we equally know that inventiveness isn't the same thing as innovation, but one leads to the other in various forms. Taking that into two different buckets, as we call them, what we're trying to do is, across that middle group, is do four things. One, we want to do world-class analysis. There's a lot of myths around in this area, particularly amongst politicians, but also amongst certain kinds of business leaders. And I think we have to puncture those myths and make sure that the true reality of what business-university partnership can do is present. I mean, for example, we don't even know how many students in the UK are getting work experience. I mean, it's just a basic thing we don't know. So, if we're going to try and focus in on this idea of talent development, we have to have some basic information that we need to sort out. The second thing is success stories or inspiration. And we're taking a very video-driven approach to this. So instead of just having flat text or case studies that would just feel a bit clunky in a Web 2.0 environment, we're using quite expensive, but nonetheless better narrative-driven, in effect, small television programs to drive the case studies. The third thing is the most exciting and the most difficult and where it might not work, but it's worth trying, is brokerage services. Now, there's two ways that we're thinking about that. One is down work experience, and how do you get quality work experience for undergraduates and postgraduates. Now, we know that a lot of students are working in supermarkets. We know that a lot of students' parents get themselves internships. What we don't know across the piece is how do we get a national platform to achieve this. Now, one of the ways you can do this is to create, in effect, an internet dating site for work experience. Along the way of my many trips into business, I was chairman of a dating company. Can't be many people in the room have done that. I'm trying to bring all that experience of what I learned in that dating company to figure out how do you partner up businesses with undergraduates for good reasons, not bad reasons. And the second part of the brokerage is intellectual property. Now, a lot of you are specialists in this room on this. One of the challenges I see is that very little of the inventiveness in the universe actually, in the end, is made available to companies. There's only so much that a tech transfer office can do. So the rest of it is what I call dark IP, like dark matter. We know it's there, because otherwise the system doesn't make sense, but we know it's not exploited. So we want to shine some light onto this dark IP. And we're working with 3 or 4 different companies who've got brokerage platforms already to see if we can extend that idea of an online service that matches up companies, particularly small companies, with university intellectual property in its broadest sense, whether that's products or services. It's a tough thing to do this. I've launched about 4 social networks and they all died. Social networks are hard to build, and as you can see, even Facebook, which has been a category killer for the past 5 years, is beginning to suffer. So that not only are they hard to build, they can disappear very quickly. But I do feel, and I feel incredibly strongly, that we're not using online and Web 2 and social networking sufficiently well in how we build the brokerage services. So this is going to be our big focus in the next 12 months. And then finally, we're going to be doing the action plans. So everything we do will turn into action and long-term thinking and long-term relationships and long-term planning. So those are the 4 pillars, and at the bottom are the audiences. And the government's also asked us to look at how do you then attract inward investment? I mean, how do we make sure that people in the world know that the UK is one of the best places in the world for university business collaboration? This is our new website, which unfortunately isn't live in the room, otherwise I'd demonstrate it for you. The website is already very case study rich. It's already got a lot of success stories. It hasn't launched the brokerage service yet, but we'll be launching it in about probably spring of next year. The way I see this happening is, I don't know how many of you use the Huffington Post or have ever written for the Huffington Post, but it's got its own content management system where you can post anything you want, basically, as long as you've, as long as it's not libelous, and you can post any case studies you want. And in the long run, the way I see the website is somewhere that you can post anything. So any of you with a great case study, or any of you with something you want to say about business-university partnerships from the perspective of your country, or the perspective of Europe, or the perspective of the world, will be able to come onto this site and post. When people launch centers, it's them going out to the world and saying, here's what we think, here's who we are, here's our views. I think this is a center in a very different way. I want us to be the center for you, and for the sector, and for business-university collaboration. We want you to come and control and to own this. And that's our ambition for it. It's not about small groups of people collaborating with each other. In the UK, it should be the national platform for collaboration. And that's the vision. And I keep saying, whenever I do this presentation, we need help. We don't have the wisdom. Not one organization has the wisdom. Not one country has the wisdom. So when we get up and running properly in spring of next year, when we get the content management system going, please come and help us. Please come and post. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Maybe we stay on stage for a moment, because I open the floor for some questions. Because I'm very sure that there are some questions. We have microphones around. So if you raise your hand, somebody will come and pass the mic to you. Maybe I start with one question from my side.
Sure.
When I listened to your presentation, it's starting again sort of by looking at the IP which is available in the universities. And you say performance measurement. These are things which are already more or less in place. What we think is more successful is starting from the market side. So where are the needs? Where are the expectations? Where are the wants and needs of companies and the business side? And then if you start by looking at them, looking back into the universities, what is available to meet these needs, that can be very successful. So what I heard from your presentation is starting with the IP again, and IP brokerage. So it's a push approach again. What do you say?
Well, I mean, it's entirely the opposite of a push approach. The idea of building a social network is you put all the businesses onto the network. That's what creates the demand. And I'm not entirely sure that, certainly in the UK, that it's true that the IP issues have been sorted, because there's two different movements going on in the UK. One is called easy access IP, where universities will only work with 5% of their IP, which means 95% is being made available to companies, but it's not being marketed to companies. So I don't think it is clear that universities have absolutely sorted out how they're going to manage their IP. And it often comes out in very clunky academic language in a way that business wouldn't understand. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done in clarifying what intellectual property is available. And frankly, it's not IP in a very narrow sense. What inventive ideas are around inside universities. So that's one thing. The second thing is create the demand by creating the network and bringing businesses onto it. So it's not, I don't think it's a question of going out, because you couldn't do it. I don't think you can go out and use market research techniques to understand the demand. You have to kind of go where the companies are. But if you're running a small company, and I've done it, you have a lot of time. So if you do have an online version of it where you can come on and see what's available and engage with the academics behind it without too much hassle, frankly, then I think you're more inclined to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe there are some questions now. Yeah, exactly there. Can you give your name first and then ask the question, please?
I worked in the past with some venture capitalists and some TTOs, and I found that the greatest problem, at least from university point of view, is what is made available to the market. Sometimes there is a problem of a cognitive distance between what academics think could be interesting for the market and what the market find interesting. So going back to the dark area you were referring to earlier, how do you plan to address this problem? Because there is still some kind of problems of selections in what you showed us, because academics are supposed to give you their IP, give you their idea, and there is a problem what they think could be interesting for the market. How do you plan to explore the rest of the stuff?
I think that goes back to this issue of what's already available. So if the university's already said we're not protecting this in any way, shape or form, which, for 95% of the time, in fact, quite a lot of places, but 99% of the time, they say, we're not going to do this, we're not protecting it, then it is obviously available. If you're an academic, then clearly if you can engage with a company and learn something from that engagement, and I always come back to this thing, if I was still an academic, I wouldn't see my job as being a consultant to companies for the sake of being a consultant. I'd see my job as trying to understand what I'm doing better, having a project, having something exciting academically. So I do think that you've got to get at all the inventiveness that's in there. We're working with a company who've got a license with almost every single university to manage their data. So we're trying to work with them through a pilot to say, right, how can we get that information out in such a way that a small company can understand it? That's, to me, one of the challenges is that the translation out from universities for business people is very tough. Now, you have to increase the ability of the company themselves to understand it. So it's a double-sided thing. I think the company themselves have to get to grips with what it is, what kind of question they're actually asking, what kind of problem they actually have. And we do have good ways of doing that in the UK. Knowledge exchange partnerships, where people put a student into a business for a period of time, and it's a shared challenge. I don't think we can do that on a national scale. It's just not a scalable solution. Whereas online is scalable. We know that you can go from 0 to 100 million online in the space of a month, right? So if we can find a way of encouraging companies to come onto it, I think that the academic world, we can get onto it and then find the online translation mechanisms for it. And it has to be of mutual interest. If it's of interest to the academic as an academic, and if it's of interest to the business because it's going to solve a problem for them, then I think you can start generating that positive feedback. Now, as I said in the presentation, this is not an easy task. I don't pretend that it is. But I've seen it happen online in so many other areas. I can't believe we can't solve it online in business-university collaboration.
Thank you.
One more question. There is one question.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And I've heard David before, and it's fascinating to see how the ideas are evolving. But a very simple question, really. The critical thing is the engagement of industry. But you're working with top industrialists. So what are they saying about this scheme? What advice have you had from them?
Well, I mean, I think the key thing, we had 5 top industrialists on the advisory board for this. And what the focus is on how do we engage small companies. I mean, big companies are keen, engaged, although not always as clear as they might be about what they're trying to do with universities, as we both know. And that's why we're doing lots of pilot projects. So we're going to try and launch a pilot project next year with about 5,000-6,000 creative and digital companies, and probably about the same number of engineering and manufacturing companies. Because I think you're better making your mistakes in small scale rather than making them in a big scale. So what the big companies are saying to us is, go and engage with small companies. We will continue to support you all the way through this. We like the idea of long-term strategic partnerships. What they are saying, actually, is we're going to have fewer partnerships with universities. So it's up to universities, therefore, to either collaborate with each other to go for the money, or to make sure that they're absolutely rigorous in their strategic thinking. I mean, that's their particular focus. So the challenge is to carry on engaging these big corporates. But something I think a lot of policymakers get confused is that literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of small companies are selling to big companies. They're in their supply chain and their value chain. And there's too often a binary divide between the big corporates and so-called SMEs. And I think you're better taking a sector-based approach to this and looking at what the supply chains look like and the value chains look like, and then using the big companies to help you engage the small companies. So there's lots of experimentation to be done over the next 3 years to get this right. But I think it's the right journey. I mean, 10 years ago it was tech transfer, it was all one-way traffic. Then it became knowledge transmission, and it became knowledge exchange, and now I think it's knowledge partnerships. And everything I see is all about knowledge partnerships. And how we foster and develop them is the key.
Well, thank you. Time is limited. Thanks for the questions and answers. Give him a hand, please. Thank you very much.